I went to the club to find the man I used to be, the one who didn't care about doing right. But sitting there, I just felt like a ghost. Then she appeared. She didn't smell like the sawdust and sweat of my shop. She smelled like expensive perfume and a life without limits. Zola didn't ask me for a prayer or a promise. She just saw the wreck I'd become and offered me the one thing I couldn't find on my knees, a way to win. She let me be weak for a second. That was her real power. She gave me a shoulder to lean on, but she was measuring the weight of my desperation the whole time. "A man with your hands shouldn't be begging for crumbs," she whispered. For the first time in months, someone didn't look at me like a failure. She looked at me like an investment. I leaned into that comfort, and in the dark of that booth, the master carpenter died, and an accomplice was born. She put a year's worth of rent on the table in a single envelope. It was the answer to every prayer I'd screamed at the ceiling, only it didn't come from heaven. I knew taking that money meant the shortcuts were no longer just about wood filler and glue. They were about my life. I looked at the cash, then back at her cold, confident eyes. I realized God hadn't abandoned me. He'd just stepped back to see if I'd actually choose the fire. I reached out, took the envelope, and followed her into the night. We were nesting in a minefield. By day, I was building a crib out of the finest mahogany, sanding it until it felt like silk. By night, I was building shells for her shipments, turning my craft into a cloak for her crimes. We were playing a dangerous game of make-believe. We'd talk about baby names while the sirens wailed 3 blocks away. I thought I could keep the filth off the nursery floor, but the smell of the shadows follows you home. You can't build a sanctuary on top of a secret and expect the floor not to creak. The stress started to eat her alive. Every phone call made her jump. Every car that slowed down outside the house made her reach for the burner phone. I begged her to walk away. I told her we had enough, that the boy didn't need a fortune, he needed a mother. But Zola was a woman who only knew how to run forward. "One last job," she'd say, her hand trembling on her belly. That's the thing about the easy way. It never lets you off the ride until it crashes. It didn't happen in a peaceful room with soft music. It happened in a panic. The last job went south, and the stress triggered the one thing my tools couldn't fix. I was driving 100 miles an hour through the rain, looking at her in the passenger seat, realizing that all the money in that warehouse couldn't buy us a single minute of safety. I was screaming at God again, but this time I wasn't asking for a shop. I was begging for her breath. The doctor didn't have to say a word. I saw it in the way he wouldn't look me in the eye. He handed me a bundle wrapped in a white blanket. My son. He was perfect. He was the only honest thing I'd made in years. But as I held him, the weight of the silence hit me. Zola was gone. She'd traded her life to bring him out of the shadows, and now I was left holding a miracle in a room full of ghosts. I had the sun, I had the money, and I had the blood of the woman I loved on my hands. They're crying for a friend. I'm crying for a life I didn't ask for, and a woman I couldn't save. The money is gone. Zola is gone. Now it's just me and a ghost in a blanket. How am I supposed to build a future when I'm standing in a hole? I thought the silence after the funeral was the end of it. I thought I could just disappear into the role of a father and let the world forget Jabari the carpenter. But the ghost Zola left behind didn't stay buried. When that knock came, it didn't sound like a landlord or a debt collector. It sounded like the law. I stood there with a screaming infant in my arms, looking at the door, and I knew you can run from the truth, but you can't hide from the paper trail. They didn't see a grieving widower. They saw a man who knew too much about hollow furniture and midnight shipments. "Help us understand, Jabari," they said, their voices smooth like sanded pine. "A man with your talent, why were you in that warehouse?" Every question was a trap. Every photo they slid across the table was a piece of the life I'd tried to build on a lie. They weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a reason to take the only thing I had left, my son. I sat in the dark, watching the police lights fade in the rearview mirror. I realized then that Zola hadn't just given me a son, she'd given me a final test. I could keep the money and wait for them to kick the door down, or I could use the only thing I had left, my skill, to build a way out. I looked at my boy and realized I couldn't be the man I was in the club, and I couldn't go back to being the man who begged in the shop. I had to become someone new, a man who could walk through the fire and come out clean. I went back to the warehouse one last time. I didn't go to hide the truth. I went to set it free. Every piece of furniture I'd built with a hollow heart had to be broken. With every strike of the mallet, I felt the weight of Zola's empire crumbling. I wasn't just exposing a crime. I was carving out a future for my boy. I packaged the truth into a crate, addressed it to the detectives, and left it where it couldn't be ignored. I was handing them the keys to the kingdom, knowing it meant the end of the life I'd known. The money was the hardest part to let go. It was the only thing that felt like security. But looking at those flames, I realized that blood-soaked paper can't buy a clean conscience. I watched the easy way turn to ash. I took my son, my father's Bible, and my original toolbox, the one I'd carried out of my shop that first morning. I walked away from the neon, the warehouse, and the ghost of the man I'd become. I didn't have a plan. I just had a direction, away from the shadows. It took years to find my way back to the grain. I don't have the big contracts or the fancy showroom anymore. I have a shed that leaks when it rains, and a list of neighbors who need their chairs mended. But when I pick up my sword now, my hands don't shake. I'm teaching my son that a man is only as good as the joint he fits and the word he keeps. I used to think God had abandoned me in that car, but I see now he was just waiting for me to stop looking for miracles and start looking for the truth. We're building something new now. It's small, and it's slow, but it's solid. And for the first time in my life, the foundation is real.